Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alyssa Cooper. I'm the chair of the IETF, and welcome to the IETF 107 Administrative and Operations Plenary, doing this in our virtual format this week. As the slide says, if you're having difficulty joining audio via VoIP, computer audio as it's called in WebEx, you might want to try the option to call in. There's been some issues with audio join today in WebEx, so if you're struggling with that, there's another option for you. Next slide, please. So as with all of our sessions this week, there's a few things that we're suggesting for people and some reminders to help us keep the session running smoothly. Please turn off your video when you join if you haven't already. Having video off gives us a better chance of keeping the session up and reducing the load on the server side. Please mute your microphone unless you're speaking. If we hear a lot of background noise from you, then the Secretariat will mute you. So please try to avoid that. We're going to be using the WebEx chat window exclusively for joining the mic queue. So typing +Q into the WebEx chat will allow you to join the queue. Typing -Q allows you to remove yourself from the queue if you change your mind. There is a Plenary Jabber room, plenary@jabber.ietf.org, which can be used for all other conversation, but we want to try to keep the WebEx chat window exclusively for the queue management purpose. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda for today. This is the welcome. Following the welcome, we will have a presentation from our meeting host, and then brief updates from a number of individuals responsible for different parts of the IETF and its sister organizations. So I'll give one for the IETF itself. We'll have Colin Perkins talk about the IRTF, John Levine for the RFC series, Victor Kwarsing for the NOMCOM, Jay Daly and Jason Livingood for the IETF LLC, and Glenn Dean for the IETF Trust. And we will try to keep all of those quite short. We know that it's an odd hour, lots of different places in the world, so we'll keep it brief. Next slide, please. And then we'll move on to our open microphone sessions, starting with the IETF Administration LLC. And then for the Internet Engineering Steering Group, we will recognize our outgoing members and do an open microphone session. And then the same for the Internet Architecture Board. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to extend deep appreciation to our meeting host, Huawei. They've made an extraordinary commitment to the IETF in continuing to support this meeting, even though we had to convert it from an in-person meeting to virtual. And so we are truly appreciative for that continued support, despite all the changes and a lot that had to happen behind the scenes and at the last minute to make it go off. So we really appreciate them sticking with us through this whole process. Next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Ryan for the host presentation.
Thank you, Alyssa. So can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone here. My name is Ryan, and I'm the head of the IETF account team of Huawei, which coordinates Huawei's activities in IETF community. So as IETF 107 virtual meeting host, and probably being the first virtual meeting host in IETF history, I guess, I'm honored to have a brief speech in this meeting. First of all, I would like to thank all IETF participants and the IETF chair, AOC, IESG, for the great work and arrangement, even in these very difficult times when the COVID-19 virus flooded in the world. We still can gather together to make progress, follow the IETF open and cooperation principles, and never stop supporting the mission and the goals of the IETF community, which is make the internet work better. Secondly, I would like to share some pity and surprise to you all. Together with AOC, we had very carefully planned for the IETF 107, including welcome reception, a great social event, customized food supplement, and also the design of the T-shirt for the 107. This purpose of this preparation was to provide a remarkable experience to all IETF 107 participants. But unfortunately, due to the implication of the virus, all this work cannot be realized. Although the goal of the remarkable IETF 107 is somehow achieved through virtual way. So please, can you see the slides? Yeah, this one, I just wanted to show you the social event as an example. Together with ALC, we really carefully planned the social event. We choose a very great venue for this is a Grounds Mountains Resort. And in this venue, we can have a lot of activities like ice skating, snowshoeing, and skiing. And even we planned a great show, which is a sandbox drawing, try to describe the over 30 years history of IETF community. This here just to show as an example. And the next page, please. This is the 107 t-shirts design. You can see the back of the t-shirt. There is a Chinese Tao, which is really to match the IETF community Tao guidance meaning. That means the people should cooperate with each other. Okay. So anyway, although this the meeting is converted to a virtual one, but the fabrications of the IETF 107 t-shirts is still ongoing. With the help of the ALC, we will be able to distribute them to all the IETF participants during the next IETF in-person meeting. Okay, so again, for every IETF participant, we really would like to thank you all. And we all believe that the implication of the virus will stop soon based on the efforts of all of the world. And as well as by the IETF community. So please take care and be safe and healthy. We hope that we can meet at the next IETF in-person meeting. Thank you. That's the end. Alisa.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. So next is the report from myself. We can go to the next slide. I just have two topics today. The first is talk a little bit about the conversion from the in-person meeting as planned to this virtual meeting, and then a brief note about our participant statistics. Next slide, please. So there's some humor going around the internet about virtual meetings, as the entire world has moved its work to video conferencing, it seems. And when I saw this cartoon in particular earlier last week, I sort of thought to myself, this could be us. It's possible that at the end of that the virtual IETF, we could think to ourselves that really we could have done everything via email, and we do so much via email anyway. But I think, at least in my personal opinion, up to now, the first half of the week, the meetings themselves have been quite useful and productive, and we did get some things accomplished that we couldn't have accomplished, certainly not as quickly over email. So I think the virtual meeting is proving some of its usefulness, at least. Next slide, please. So in converting from the in-person meeting to the virtual, we had not a lot of time to plan and many constraints. Just to tick through a few of them. Major one is time zones. We are spread all over the world. And while that means that when we have an in-person meeting, different people experience jet lag differently, we have a totally different set of challenges, not related to jet lag, but to what time it is in different places when people are joining. And that's doesn't have any easy solutions, obviously. We had already worked out the working group and research group conflicts for the in-person meeting, and that is always it's a challenge every time with a regular meeting. And so figuring out what to do in terms of conflicts was not straightforward. We had the notion that the amount of time needed for some of the virtual sessions might differ from what we had planned for the in-person meeting, just because the nature of the interaction is different. So we had to think about that. We had to think about the impact of the virtual meeting on the non-com requirements as spelled out in RFC 8318. We've had some further discussion about that even just today in the Gen Dispatch meeting. But this has implications because the non-com requirements are very much rooted in the notion of having 3 in-person meetings per year. And then we had to think about web conferencing technology, which everybody, I'm sure, has lots of opinions about and experiences with. So there was a lot to kind of balance and not a lot of time because we made this decision to switch to virtual not too long ago. So as people, I think, are aware, some people are aware, we reduced our schedule pretty significantly to put emphasis on groups that really needed bootstrapping, BOFs, dispatch groups, and working groups that would be meeting for the first time to give them the benefit of that real-time interaction and participation from across the IETF's areas that new groups need in order to establish themselves, as opposed to existing groups, which might be a little bit more accustomed to working via email and having interim meetings and so forth. In terms of the timing, we anticipated having relatively few participants in the part of the world between Europe and China. And so this schedule aimed to give what we expected to be the bulk of the participants an opportunity to experience some version of nighttime, perhaps a little bit more on the earlier end or the later end of that, but at least some dark hours where we weren't having meetings scheduled. And we thought if we're asking people to join meetings multiple days in a row, that was pretty important for everybody's ability to participate effectively. With that said, a deep respect for people who are joining us from India, from the Middle East, from elsewhere, who are working through the night, people who are dealing with family commitments on the side, who are staying up late, getting up early in order to progress the work of the IETF. We know that that's a serious commitment and it's not ideal. And we definitely appreciate that people have made some sacrifices in order to be able to participate. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to just share a personal note, actually 2 personal notes, reflecting about this experience of the virtual meeting. I wanted to extend specific appreciation to Alexa Morris from the IETF Secretariat and to Jay Daly and Greg Wood from the IETF LLC. These 3, together with the Secretariat staff, have worked tirelessly over the last 2 weeks to make this meeting happen. There's an incredible amount of work that had to happen behind the scenes in order to get all of this in order. And I think the 4 of us have really worked together just impeccably as a team. And it's been really an uplifting experience to be able to work with them and for them to do such an amazing job. So drop them a note, or next time you see them in person, which I hope won't be too long from now, please extend our thanks to them because they've just done an amazing job. I also wanted to just take a moment for us to collectively marvel at how the internet's ability to connect people is really a bright spot in what is otherwise a fairly dark time. I think, as everybody recognizes, it seems like a large part of the world has experienced both the joys and the pitfalls of video conferencing in recent weeks, many people for the first time. And more broadly, the internet is allowing people to connect in so many ways, and in some cases that are critical and life-saving ways in a very difficult time, even though they are have to be physically separated. And that's something that our community and everyone who has worked to build the internet should be proud of, that we're making a contribution to people's lives in a really meaningful way. I think it also kind of gives some renewed purpose to our mission here, which is to make the internet work better. We have the opportunity to channel all of the anxiety and uncertainty and confinement that we're experiencing right now into continuing to improve the network upon which the entire world is relying in a really serious way. And so that's something that I know I'm grateful for, and that we all can be grateful for, that we have purpose, we have mission, and we can continue to work in service of it. So I'm glad that we can share that together. Next slide, please. With respect to the future, we have a lot of weighty, difficult conversations to have about how the virtual meeting experience impacts us. And there's a number of different threads that have already emerged. So the first one I have here on the slide is about scheduling in light of time zone constraints. This is, as I said at the top, a very difficult task. It always disadvantages some people. We've had this conversation in the context of physical meetings as we move them around to different geographies, but it's not really the same set of issues to tackle. So in the IESG, we've been talking about this a little bit. We were much more focused on 107 than on the future for obvious reasons. But we will be kicking off some discussion about this in the near future, and we'll let people know, which list is the list where we intend to do that. We're hoping to get that organized in fairly short order. The next one is eligibility for the 2020-2021 NomCom. So this is the NomCom that will be seated this year. There's a discussion thread that's happening about that on the IETF at IETF.org list. And we're asking people to comment in that thread by April 30th. This is a topic that has a very short fuse because the NomCom needs to be seated in the first half of this year. And the eligibility criteria state that one has to have attended 3 out of the last 5 IETF meetings in order to be eligible. So we need to figure out how IETF 107 fits into that. The next one is about eligibility for future NomComs. So also NomCom related, but this is a distinct topic because it doesn't have that short time frame as it does for this year's NomCom. But nevertheless, the developments in the world clearly throw a wrench into the way that we've traditionally established NomCom eligibility, and we need to figure that out. And so for the time being, this discussion is based on the Gen Dispatch session that we just had. We'll continue on the eligibility discuss list. And then there are many, many other considerations for all virtual meetings related to technology and hallway and replacing the kind of socializing that we normally get to do and side meetings and all kinds of other things. And the list where that discussion has been going on is the many couches list at IETF.org. So I encourage everybody to check out all of these different discussion venues. I know it's kind of a lot. There's what we're trying to sort of segment the problem because there's many dimensions to it. So appreciate folks chiming in on the various lists and threads if you have thoughts, opinions, and experiences to share. Next slide, please. So 107 participant statistics. I thought some of you might miss this slide if we didn't have it, so I tried to format it the same way that we normally do, but we are not actually sharing the participant statistics midweek as we normally do because we are going to calculate how we count who attended in a different way since we're running a virtual meeting and you didn't have your registration tied to check-in or anything like that we normally do in a face-to-face meeting. So we will be posting participant statistics and updating the community about what the participation looked like at this meeting, but we're not prepared to do it during the meeting week as we normally are. I'd also just, again, remind people to register if you are attending remotely and you didn't register already. Again, you don't, strictly speaking, have to do this in order to join any of our WebEx sessions, but it will help us to get a sense of numbers and hopefully be able to compare in some reasonable way with other meetings that we've had in the past. So please register if you haven't already. If you were registered for the in-person meeting, you have been converted into a remote participant already and you don't need to register. But if you never registered, then we'd like for you to register, so please do. Next slide, please. There's much more covered in our report that we have posted online from myself and from the IESG. We received one appeal in the last cycle, which we've just posted a response to within the last day. And there's lots more reports from other groups associated with the IETF. So if you take a look at the meeting materials, not all of the reports will be posted yet, but some of them will be posted soon. And there's always more content on the blog if people want to check that out. I think that's it for my report, and we can move on to the IRTF. So Colin is up next.
Thanks, Alyssa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the Internet Research Task Force plenary report. My name is Colin Perkins. I'm the IRTF chair. Next slide. So the IRTF is a parallel organization to the IETF that provides a home for longer-term research work that relates to the evolution of the Internet protocols, applications, architectures, and technologies. The IRTF is organized as a set of research groups. None of the groups are actually meeting this week. Those shaded in dark blue on the slide have been scheduled or are planning to schedule virtual meetings during the next few weeks. So if you're interested in any of those topics, please do look out for those meetings and try and attend over the next few weeks. Next slide, please. In the IRTF, rather than holding BOFs to form new research groups, we charter new work as proposed research groups that meet for a year and then undergo a review to determine if they'll continue. I'm very pleased to note that the computation in the network group had its review in Singapore and was approved as a full research group in December. And the Quantum Internet group has just finished its review and has just been approved as a full research group earlier this week. They're both doing some really nice work, so look out for their meetings and look out for the meetings for the rest of the research groups coming up over the next month or so. Next slide. In addition to the research groups, we run the Applied Networking Research Workshop in conjunction with ACM SIGCOMM. The 2020 edition of this workshop is planned to take place in July. Miria and Roland are organizing that, and hopefully it will take place in person in Madrid. The call for papers for the workshop is available on the website. The submission deadline is the 10th of April, and if you've got any interesting applied networking research, then please do consider submitting to that workshop. As I say, we're hoping to run this as an in-person event in Madrid. If we succeed in doing that, there will be travel grants available. So if you're a student, look out for the student travel grants, which are available on the website. If we fail to do that, we'll be holding the workshop online instead. So please do consider submitting your applied networking research work. Next slide. Okay, finally, the final thing we do, we run the Applied Networking Research Prize in conjunction with the Internet Society. The prize is awarded for recent results in applied networking research that are relevant for transitioning into the Internet standards and into shipping Internet products. We had three really interesting talks planned for this meeting from Renisha, from Georgia, and from Ingmar. And unfortunately, we had to postpone them due to the cancellation of the in-person meeting. We're hoping to bring the winners to one of the in-person IETF meetings later in this year, so they can give their awards then and participate in the meeting. If that's not possible, we'll be doing the talks at one of the future IRTF open meetings online. In the meantime, though, the links to the award-winning papers are on the slide, so please do take a look. Some really nice work there, and yeah, hopefully we'll see these people in person later in the year, and if not, look out for the talks online later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have John Levine.
Hi, thank you. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you the short update about as the temporary RFC series project manager. Next slide, please. The last full-time, or at least last full RFC series editor resigned at the end of last year. So I'm here for a year and a half holding the fort. And the normal RSC duties are currently split between the RSOC and me. Next, please. I'm pleased to report that the production of RFCs is still continuing. We now have 100 RFCs published in XML. It's been slower than we expected because even though there was a lot of work done on the tools before they started, not surprisingly, since these are new tools in a new format and that there's been a lot of bugs found in the tools, particularly with the making the HTML and PDF output look nice. There's been some issues with the XML vocabulary, and that's slowed things down a lot. One of the things that I'm scratching my head about, and that I need to socialize some, is the question that since the XML is what is considered canonical and the PDF is derived from that, would it be worth considering the possibility of putting up with less than perfectly beautiful PDF for a while, so we can fix the tools and re-render the non-canonical stuff? I'm specifically not proposing that. I'm just saying it's something to think about. The service level agreement has been on hold since the switch to the new tools. It's clearly going to stay on hold so long as we're dealing with the COVID outbreak. Most of the people working for the RFC Production Center work remotely. So at this point, we have been calling into their meetings, and they still seem to be not as productive as you would hope. But at this point, it would be foolish to make any promises. Next, please. We came up with a new vocabulary for the V3 XML, which we have been using. As we've gained experience with it, we've made some changes to the XML to deal with problems that came up, or not so much problems that came up, but the sort of formatting and content issues that we hadn't anticipated. The change process has not been managed as well as it might have been. In particular, the documentation of the changes to the vocabulary are way behind the code and the tools. I'm working on that with the people involved. At some point, we'll have to figure out when the changes are done. We can say, yes, this is version 3.1. And then we may go back and retroactively consider whether some of the changes don't necessarily make sense for documents that are supposed to be archival and be possible for people to read and re-render 30 or 40 years from now. Next, please. Another big change is internationalization. In most places, I wouldn't say allowed in most places, what I'm trying to say here. Author names and addresses can now include Unicode. So if if your name is natively written in Chinese, we can now put that in the RFCs along with the English. And there are limited other places where non-ASCII characters are allowed. Technically, so putting Unicode into HTML or PDFs is not hard, give or take layout of mixed scripts, which is actually terribly hard, but there's libraries that deal with that. The most difficult thing is to proofread stuff. I mean, if it's just a few characters that are not in English, those are fairly straightforward to deal with. But we don't have anybody on staff who has skills in non-English languages good enough to proofread non-trivial chunks of text. So again, that's something. There's certainly plenty of people who speak lots of languages here in the IETF. This should not be a problem that we can't solve, but it's one we need to think about. Next, please. And that's it.
Great, thank you, John. Tara is next.
Hello?
Hey, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, next slide, please. I'll just make this a brief update from the NomCom for 2019-2020. Next slide, please. So we had, from last year into this year, we seated in 105. We then had a call for nominations. We conducted the interviews in IETF 106 back in Singapore. And we've had all the selections completed and approved from the various confirming bodies as of the end of January. And so now the NomCom is moving into quiet mode, pending any needed interim selections that may come up until the next NomCom is seated. Next NomCom, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Once again, there's a quick list of the voting members and the non-voting members, including the liaisons and other helps. We had tremendous positive participation this year, and I was very, very thankful to have such an energetic and engaged team. So thank you very much to the NomCom members. Next slide. Here is a list of the results from the ISG, the ISG selections, the IAB selections, the LLC, and the trust. So we send our congratulations out to those who were nominated and were confirmed, and hope to see great things from them. Next slide, please. We wanted to also thank the community. The NomCom was very happy with the tremendous support we had in terms of comments, people visiting the NomCom rooms over 105 and 106. We had a lot of feedback. It was great to see, and we were able to utilize that as we went through our deliberations, and were able to come up with our selections. So thank you for everyone. And I wanted to make a special thank you to Scott, who was a tremendous, great past chair and helped me out quite a bit. Next slide, please. In terms of the next NomCom chair, that selection is still in progress by the ISOC president. It'll be a challenging year, so hopefully, someone brave will come up to bat and to help us as this year comes up as we move through for the next round of selections. Next slide, please. And I guess another call to action, we kind of say similar things each time. One of the things is we want to remind folks, please put your hat in the ring if as a NomCom volunteer. It's a taxing but incredibly rewarding experience. You learn a lot about the IETF as you go through the process. Obviously, this year might pose an interesting way to select the volunteers, but please put your name in the hat. Sorry, put your hat in the ring. In terms of for positions, one of the things we've battled this year is many years is some positions we had fewer than desirable in terms of number of nominees. We would love to see more qualified folks in future NomComs put their names forward. We did try to simplify the questionnaire this year. We believe that had some positive momentum, and we definitely focused in on making sure we utilize the interview period to be able to dig in. So we appreciate all those who did put their names forward, and we definitely, as a community, would love to see more people be able to put their names forward in the future. And please provide your support to the next NomCom chair, as this will be a very interesting year coming. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I think there is someone who has a question for you, Michael Richardson, if you don't mind taking a question.
So I wanted to know if any of your voting members were exclusively remote, and I wanted to know if you had to do any interviews where you had a mix of remote and local voting members or candidates.
Good question. So the answer was yes. We did have one of our voting members who was unable to attend, and we modified the deliberations and we were able to have them participate. The particular challenge we had was we had one individual who's remote and all the others were in the room, but we definitely were able to find a way to make that work. Everyone was very cooperative, and it can be made to work. It requires that the in-room folks are diligent in listening to the remote folks and make sure that we provide them opportunity to speak and provide input. So yes, we were able to make that work. In terms of interviews, we did have a few interviews that were remote, where both the interviewers were both in the room and we had remote interviewers join, or that one individual join remote, and we were able to make that work as well. It took preparation, it took cooperation from the team, but we did find a way to make it work.
Did you need special support from the Secretariat?
In this particular case, the standard tools that they provided were sufficient. We had the WebEx dialing capabilities, which we utilized. The one tool that one of our voting members brought, we utilized, was an in-room speaker mic system, which wasn't part of the standard toolkit, but something that one of the members had, which was that helped make it work. So I think most of the tools we used were all standard, but there was a couple of items that we kind of MacGyvered. Sorry, I shouldn't have used that term. There was a couple of things that we made work on our own to kind of work through it. So not too much additional tools from what we had. Did that answer your question, or did I not quite hit the mark?
You got it. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks.
Thanks, Victor. We can move on to the IETF Administration LLC. Okay, and Jason.
Thanks, Alyssa. I'll start. Next slide, please. And next slide as well, please. So I want to start off by thanking Huawei. They made our life considerably easier. I mean, it's a very large investment that Huawei put into a meeting like this, and they were very helpful indeed about all of the difficulties that we encountered, and they've continued to sponsor the virtual meeting, which is fantastic. So thank you very much, Huawei. Next slide, please. We have two other meeting sponsors as well who took the plunge to sponsor a virtual meeting. So CIRA, the registry for .ca, and VeriSign, the registry for .com.net and others. So thank you both very much for continuing to sponsor this meeting. It's made our life considerably easier. Next slide, please. And a special shout out to TELUS, who put in an enormous amount of work for us to have connectivity ready at Vancouver, which of course we're not using, but we still want to recognise the significant work they did. So thank you very much, TELUS. Next slide, please. And we continue to be supported by our equipment sponsors, Cisco and Juniper Networks. Thank you very much. And of course, we're all using Cisco WebEx now, which is donated by Cisco for us to use. Next slide, please. So our sponsors have been fantastic in this regard. Some, as I've said, have sponsored this meeting. The others have all agreed simply to shift their sponsorship to IETF 108. So thank you to ICANN, thank you to Akamai, and thank you to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. That's been very simple, very painless process. And also a special shout out to Comcast, who sponsor us across the whole year, so we can put their funds against any meeting we want to. Next slide, please. There was still a code sprint, albeit virtually, held on Saturday. And so thank you to the contributors here who were able to participate. And next slide, please. So IETF 108 Madrid. Of course, there are still concerns about this going, but we want to thank Ericsson for being willing to host this, and we still have sponsorship opportunities available, so please do contact us about this. Next slide, please. And finally, thank you to all of our global hosts, Cisco, Comcast, Ericsson, Juniper Networks, NBC Universal, and Nokia. We really do have some very committed global hosts who are willing to make a long-term commitment to us, and without that, we really would have a much harder struggle to find money on our hands. So this is this ongoing support from these hosts is vital to us. Thank you. Next slide, please. Future meeting venues for you. We are we'll probably have a couple more to announce soon after this meeting. As you can see, we have 2 further to go in 2020. Madrid, and then on to Bangkok, and then next year we're moving on to Prague, San Francisco, and then some more still to be announced. We are quite well advanced on negotiating some of these, but with the current issues, our meetings team are unable to travel and look at further venues, so we may be a little bit delayed in telling you about venues beyond this. Next slide, please. And meeting snapshot. We had 703 people who had paid for attendance. And for remote participants, we've just taken a guess here. As Alyssa said earlier, we don't really know. We've had over 200 in some sessions, but we haven't yet done the work to understand whether it's the same 200 turning up all the time. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to hand over to Jason Livingood from the LLC board. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, Jason.
Great, all right. So thank you everybody for joining. Our board remains the same as it has been the last few meetings. All of the folks shown here are in the meeting today as well, which is convenient. Next slide, please. We publish, as usual, our upcoming board meetings. Starting in January, we moved to a monthly board meeting cadence with some increase in frequency prior to the decision making around the Vancouver venue and whether we would continue with the virus and so on. So there was some increased frequency right around that time, but we're getting back to our monthly cadence, at least for now. Our next meeting is tomorrow, so feel free to join that meeting virtually. We'll all be remote, obviously. And then thereafter, for now at least, we'll have a monthly cadence, although subject to revision for more frequent meetings, as needed based upon how things evolve here with the situation. Next slide, please. So some of the work that we've recently completed, we finished our fiscal year 2020 budget since our last November meeting, IETF 106, and that's in place now. Of course, I'll talk about the finances later on in a moment with some caveats there. We finalized and implemented an investment policy statement, which is a fancy way of just sort of saying what's our strategy for investing funds and the mix of assets or types of investments that the money would go into and so on. So that's complete as well. In January, we had a strategic planning retreat in Washington, D.C., and did that for a couple of days. That was very productive. And we published the IETF Director's Goals for 2020. That was published, I think, late January, early February. And finally, we updated our board meeting minutes policy to ensure that those board minutes would be published within a couple of weeks of a board meeting. And that was something that sort of fell between the, fell in the cracks, as we moved from twice a month to once a month meetings. Next slide, please. So things that we're currently working on, and the first one here is going back to look at our formation documents. There were a few things there. Number one, we had to sort of communicate back to them that we had completed some compliance sorts of things, set up policies and so on. And then, the financial commitment they've made was really for the first 2 years. So this fiscal year is the last one in that formal agreement, and the formation documents specify that we come to some, ongoing, continuing agreement sometime this year. And we've started that process of working on some of those numbers. So that remains a key work item for us to ensure long-term financial stability. And then the second item is completing our fundraising and sponsorship strategy. This was one of the primary work activities that was the focus of our January retreat. And we're continuing to work on that this year, the first half of this year in particular. Of course, as we look at longer term investments to fiscal year 2021 and beyond, we're looking at other areas that might need investment, especially with the prospect or potential of more remote meetings and interims and so on, looking at where investment might be needed incrementally and figure out how to factor that into future budgets. Obviously, much will be learned from this virtual meeting that will inform that. So more to come on that. And then policy compliance program, more to come here. Essentially, once the policies are in place, that's all well and good, but people have to be trained or informed about the policies so they understand them, and then they have to be checked up on. So more will come there, such as the whistleblower program and so on. Next slide, please. So this is a quick snapshot of the current fiscal year, and I will offer two important caveats here. Number one, this is only reflective of 1 month of the operating year, since we've only closed out and published the January numbers, at least in the top part of the balances. And so obviously the meeting hasn't taken place yet. Really, we have three main financial events associated with the meetings every year. So that's normally the case. Of course, with this extraordinary change of venue from Vancouver to virtual, there'll be significant financial impacts. Luckily, as Jay related via email, we've got insurance that will cover some of that, and we're in the process of going through that. So we won't know for a little while what the full financial implications will be. But when that becomes available, certainly Jay will communicate that out. And, as needed, this is obviously why we have reserves, and we can dip into those reserves as necessary. So we're well positioned financially and stable. Next slide. And of course, typical contact information applies here. And the one note at the bottom is that we've now have this new URL for whistleblower concerns, so you can submit your concerns that way if you wish. That's really the only new addition here compared to the slides previously. Next slide. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you both. We had a couple people join the queue, but assuming that these are questions for either Jay or the board, we will be having the LLC open mic just after the IETF Trust presentation. So I would ask you to stay we'll keep you in the queue and come back during the open mic, unless that's a problem for anybody. And with that, I think we can move on to the IETF Trust.
Hi there, Alyssa. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi there. Next slide, please. So these are the 5 IETF trustees. Like the LLC, we are a group that's stuck together. I was the NOMCOM appointee again this year, and Stefan Wagner was reaffirmed by the IESG. So we got to stay together, which was actually very good for the trust because we don't have to spend the money to re-register all of our registrations that are actually put under people's names, the way things are organized. So for those of you who don't know, the IETF Trust is essentially in charge of the trademark, copyrights, and software licenses for the IETF, the IETF community, internet community. This means practical things like if you want to put the IETF logo on a t-shirt, you need to come to us to get a license. Those are my fellow trustees, Joel Halpern, John Levine, Kathleen Moriarty, who's also our treasurer, and Stefan. Next slide, please. So 2019 was actually a pretty busy year for us, which is very unusual because the trust is usually a very quiet activity. One of the big things we did was we completed the IS-2 transition. That meant, in practical sense, that in the past, all the trustees had been the IOC members. And when we did away with the IOC and replaced it with the LLC, the trustees actually split off from that. And for the first time, we actually brought on a bunch of brand new trustees that had not been IOC members. And we got together and we had to complete that transition. One of the things we also had to complete was we lost our executive director who had previously been a member of the trust and was able to do some of the administrative work. We had to shift around some things and have a little bit more support from AMS going forward into 2020 to cover some of the stuff that the executive director did in the past for the trust. One of the things we're also working on is if you go to the IETF Trust website, it is a little bit dated. It is under the style of the old IETF website, and when the IETF did their update, they didn't update the trust as well. So we're now underway doing a redesign and a refresh, and that will be revealed later in the year. It was hopefully going to be revealed around IETF 107, but other things got very busy, and we were unable to get that done in time. And the other thing we did get done, though, is the 2020 budget for the IETF Trust is finalized. We were just waiting on the LLC to finalize and publish theirs, which they did, thankfully. And we've now finalized ours, and it's published on the IETF Trust website. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. That takes us to the IETF Administration LLC open microphone session, which will be chaired, I believe, by Jason. Is that right?
Sure.
We have two people in queue from previously.
Great. Who was the first one in queue?
Victor.
Victor. Okay. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question was back to this when Jay was speaking. When we saw the registration count, I think it was at 703 I saw there. We feel is that lower than we had originally anticipated for that meeting? And do we feel that the building challenges that we face would have been part of that numbers? I recall North American meetings, I thought would be a little higher typically in terms of in-person registrations. So that was my original question is, do we feel there was a connection there, or that was about normal from what we expected?
So Jason, I'll pick that one up. The initially registrations were tracking our expected number of registrations for a North American meeting, but it wasn't too far into that when concerns about COVID-19 started to appear, and it then deviated from that. So my short answer, no, I don't think there are any problems about the venue in that regard. And if it hadn't been for COVID-19, I think we would have been on track for a similar North American meeting in terms of registration numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and next up, it looked like JCK, which I'm guessing is John Clemson.
It is. I had two issues, but Jay and I just settled one of them in jabber, so I'll deal with only the other one. The appointment of an anonymous whistleblower channel, which announcement of an anonymous whistleblower channel and a contractor to manage it came as a surprise to many of us. It's probably a wonderful idea, but it's also a sign that it looks like a sign that the LLC is evolving in the direction of looking more and more like a corporation rather than the way the IETF is traditionally run, even under the IOAC. Are there more moves like that in plan consistent with your policies coming comment?
So this is Jason. I can speak to that. We created a whistleblower policy when we did the open policy consultation that was, I think, maybe in the sort of fall of last year. And so, through the sort of October through December timeframe, we worked on that. We had the policies that were up on GitHub, and we took questions and comments through a bunch of different channels, email and GitHub itself. And there was a whistleblower policy that was part of that. And this is one of the requirements that we had, when we formed. There was a requirement in some of the formation documents for this sort of thing. So it's not necessarily a whistleblower policy that is IETF, participant-wide, but you can see this on the GitHub site. And really, getting the third party in place was just the final step there. And by the way, I should note as well, not only was it recommended, but it was required in the formation agreement by ISOC. So really what you're seeing is really the net result of us executing on all those requirements and then putting into force the policies that we communicated and developed with the community last year.
Jason, I wasn't objecting to anything you've done, and I was vaguely aware of that in the fall, although some of us were preoccupied with the IASA 2 working group, as you know. I was asking if there are more things like that in the queue that you can anticipate and could tell us about an outline, either today or on the IETF list.
No, well, there are not any other policy things that are in queue right now. As you saw on sort of the list of things we're working on, it's really just executing on the structure we've already got, figuring out the sponsorship and fundraising for the future and so on and so forth. But no plans for additional policies anytime soon. And as noted, I think the key is just putting everything into force, really making sure that those are real policies and not just paper.
Okay, thanks very much.
And next up in the queue, do we have Tony, it looks like?
Indeed, and in regards to John, and maybe a couple of follow-on questions. One is, what is the IETF LLC doing to ensure it complies with antitrust laws other than having the processes examined by its lawyers? There is nothing on the IETF website other than the 2012 list archive. Second question is, what is the LLC process for addressing conflicts of interest when they're raised? Some of them have been raised but not carried forward, and the reasoning was opaque. Can a clear reporting process be established before the next IETF meeting and transparency around this set up? And then related again to transparency, which actually I think follows from John's question about getting better organized. So a few plenaries ago, a question was raised about transparency of area director funding. It was a great idea, had a couple of ADs committed on the spot. It could be extended to chairs. The IETF chair said it would be looked into. What is the result? That's it.
Okay, so I think I caught three separate questions there. I had antitrust, some conflict of interest things, and then AD funding. Alyssa, maybe you want to address AD funding first, and then I'll hit antitrust and COI.
Sure. Yeah, this is Alyssa Cooper. So where this landed was indeed with the IESG, and it was during the time when the IETF LLC was starting to develop its conflict of interest policy, which I guess Jason will probably speak to next. And our conclusion, I believe, was to see what that looked like, and I think the IAB had the same conclusion. We were all kind of waiting in cascade to see if we could harmonize the policies in terms of disclosing people's conflicts, which naturally would disclose their main sources of funding. So the LLC completed that a while back, and then the IAB has just completed its own, I think, process and published its statement about conflict of interest. And so now the ball is in the IESG's court to sort out what we will do and whether we will follow either of them or develop our own. So it's still a pending item for the IESG to tackle.
So I think that may have covered the last two of the three, but certainly if there are other COI concerns, maybe send them over email or something and we can take a look. The first question pertained to antitrust. And we have a number of times looked at antitrust and whether we wanted to revisit that. We did that, I feel like it was in the fourth quarter one last time. And there were a bunch of discussions on some email lists. So we had gone back and looked at some archives. Jay, I think you also have been talking to counsel about this. Do you want to reply and provide any additional information?
Yes, at the IETF 106 plenary, a comment was made on an open mic session about major upcoming antitrust issues that the IETF ought to be aware of. And so I asked our counsel to get in touch with the person directly about that and see if there were any specifics that we ought to be aware of. And no specifics emerged, so no further action was taken. Our counsel do keep a watching brief on any emerging antitrust issues, but otherwise there's nothing else moving on that front. Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe I can help. I perform this activity to some extent for the in conjunction with ETSI, and as some of you know, I funded the Internet Society the first review of this, and arguably there's a continuing problem that could get worse.
Hi, this is Greg Wood, and I'm gonna just jump in to manage the queue for this part of the session. Could whoever was just speaking say their name? I didn't catch it.
Sure, Tony Kowski.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So looking at the WebEx chat, where if you want to indicate joining the queue, just type +Q. I see next Karen O'Donoghue, who's bringing a question from the Jabber room. Karen?
Yes, the question was, what was the target date for a go, no-go decision for IETF 108, or is there one?
Well, that's that's an excellent question. I'm not certain that there is a definite date as yet. Jay, do you want to speak to that based on your discussions with the Secretariat and so on? I think at a high level, I would say, we were trying to sort of get through this meeting first, and then based on what we learned, do a pretty major reassessment. But Jay, what would you like to add since you've been so intensively working with the Secretariat on these issues?
Yeah, so this is, to be clear, a joint conversation across the LLC Secretariat and the IESG. And so far, no, we do not have a target date. We are, as Jason said, want to get through this meeting. We are reaching out to various people that we need to speak to, host sponsors and those sorts of people, and trying to work backwards from the time so that we understand the implications better. And so that's going to be quite intense work as soon as this meeting finishes, and then we'll hopefully have a better idea within a week or two from there.
Okay. I see next Larry in the queue. Larry?
I just want to urge you to do contingency planning for the possibility.
I'm sorry, Larry, could I ask you to say your full name, please?
Larry Macenter.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you to do contingency planning for the possibility that face-to-face meetings won't be possible in the foreseeable future. It's because of travel restrictions. And add that to your list of contingencies.
Thank you, Larry. I'll pick up on that. Yes, we do that. We are doing that contingency planning. This, of course, is the first time this has happened. So, and the LRC is relatively new, so there is no existing thorough contingency plan in this regard. But that is something that we and the IESG are working together on, and will be developing over time, certainly.
And I would just add from the mailing list discussion about this question as well, it's certainly important that as those come together in draft form, that they're shared for community comment and get the benefit of a lot of people taking a look at them and commenting.
Okay, thank you. I see Pete Resnick in the queue next. Pete.
Hi, and you can hear me. So going back to this question of antitrust, I just wanted to get the order of how things happened. Someone brought up a comment at IETF 106 that this should be looked into. Who directed legal counsel to go look into this?
I'll pick that up, Pete. So that was a comment made from the open mic session, and so I did. I instructed our counsel to speak to that person so that we could understand what they were talking about and understand what they were saying, because they were suggesting that there was some new legislation or something else coming that was going to be a problem. And so that's the conversation that we had, a fact gathering information, but no facts were gathered, no information came from that, and so it stopped at that point.
Okay, and my concern being, of course, any policy around antitrust or anything else for that matter would go over to the ISG. It wouldn't be in scope for the LLC to take that on, correct?
I believe that's the case. Well, I believe it's an issue for both organisations, because I believe the LLC carries the legal liability, or some legal liability in this case, and so it is something that needs to be worked across both organisations. But in terms of substantive issues around it, yes, we would defer to the ISG on that, and our role is to ensure that we have the information there, that we can present the options, we can do the research, so that the ISG doesn't have to become lawyers.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see anybody else in the queue. So Jay, I think it's back to you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then I think we are done. Session.
Great, thank you. We can move on. So moving on to the Internet Engineering Steering Group. Next slide, please. So this time around, we have 5 area directors who we are saying goodbye and thank you to. The outgoing members are Ignace Bagdonas, who was 2 years as the management area director, Suresh Krishnan, who spent 4 years as internet area director and handled, among other things, many a difficult conflict review, as well as some proposals for new and different versions of IP. So always interesting and challenges in the internet area. We're also saying goodbye and thanks to Miria Kulevind, spent 4 years as the transport AD, one of the people who helped bring us the working group that has eaten up a lot of the IETF, also known as Quick. She's not going far though, as she's moving on to become a member of the IAB and in fact the IAB chair. Alexei Melnikov, who spent 4 years as Art AD and had also previously served a 2-year term as App AD when we had the app area. So he is the longest serving member to be stepping down this time, and we'll certainly miss his wisdom derived from longevity. And finally, Adam Roach, who spent 3 years as Art AD, and to his credit, that infamous cluster 238 of documents related to WebRTC got into RFC editor processing just before he is stepping down. So he dealt with many of those documents, but will not be dealing with Auth 48. We'll pass that token on to his successor. Next slide, please. So typically, this would be the point in the in-person plenary where the outgoing ADs would ceremoniously pass their badge dots to the incoming ADs. And sadly, we're not co-located, so we can't physically pass the dots, but now we can all think about how the dots might be flying through the air, through the internet, on your screen. So that's the dot passing portion. Go to the next slide, please. And now we are ready for IESG open mic. And you can see these are the folks outgoing, continuing, and incoming IESG. We are not going to do the round of introductions that we would normally do given the audio setup, but you can see our faces and read our names on the slide. So the queue is open. Okay, Michael Richardson.
Hi, so I wanted to know, get some update on the openstand.org effort, and whether this is still an IESG project or what exactly.
Yes, thank you, Michael, and thank you for submitting your question in advance. So the OpenStand project specifies some principles that open standards organizations abide by, for those who aren't familiar with it. And if you look at the OpenStand website, you can see that the web presence has been archived. So the principles are there. They're continuing to remain up on the site for people to reference and understand and potentially to use again in the future. But there's not any active promotion that is going on right now. It's an effort that we engaged in together with other standards development organizations and with ISOC, and we're still obviously coordinating with those bodies. but there isn't any active development or promotion of the principals at this point. Does that answer the question?
So there's no plans to go forward with it?
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by going forward, but the principles are there to be used by people who need them, but we're not actively doing anything with them right now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next in queue, we have Tony Rutkowski.
Hello again. I have two questions. One relates to particularly the relationships with other SDOs. I was wondering what concrete steps have been taken to address, if you will, the competition that's sort of taking place amongst the SDOs and the potential attrition of newcomers and diverse stakeholders. That's related to, in some cases, a kind of a hostile atmosphere that IETF also has compared to other SDOs. Second question is, I'm not sure whether it's ESG or IAB, but it has to do with lawful interception. That's likely to become increasingly important. Will a position paper be prepared on that, or is everyone so intransigent on the subject that that's not likely to occur? Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. Let's take the second one first. Do we have a security AD who wants to talk about lawful intercept?
Tony, this is Roman. I guess we would like to better kind of understand what kind of position paper and for whom you'd like us to publish that on.
Right, and this is Ben, because we already have RFC 2804 that, as far as I can tell, is on the same topic.
Well, there has been an RFC. This has, of course, been an ongoing controversy going back into the 1990s when CLIA was first passed and its counterparts in Europe and other places. I'm aware of the RFC, but it's not clear basically who would have the ball here of ever changing the position, whether it would be the IESG or IAB, or whether it's possible to do a position paper.
I'm not seeing any incentive or desire from the community to reopen the established consensus. I don't think there's anything to do here. There's no one to have the ball.
Okay, although you are aware, perhaps, particularly with respect to 5G, that the FCC asserted as a requirement for all 5G implementations. So that's going to be quite interesting and definitely raises the issue again, particularly with respect to whether the IETF is going to do anything in the 5G world.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And I think on the question about how do we work with other SDOs, as is the case with many things in the IETF, we tend to take a bottom-up approach. So the most useful thing that we do, I think, or the most fruitful, is that we collaborate with individuals who are working across SDOs to make sure that our work aligns and that the adjacencies are aligned between the work that we're doing and the work that other SDOs are doing. So having people who are participating in multiple bodies who can translate back and forth in terms of what the requirements are and what the interfaces are between our protocols and the standards that are being produced elsewhere is always, I think, the most important thing that we do at the bottom. And then building up from there, we have liaison managers who manage the relationships across the board between the work of the IETF and working groups that are relevant, and other SDOs. And then the IAB has responsibility for shepherding those liaison managers, checking in with them, making sure that the relationships are solid. With some of the groups that we engage with on a more frequent basis, we have also some leadership coordination. So with IEEE 802, for example, we have an ongoing communications channel. We have regular sync ups where we go through a shared list of items of interest and try to make sure that we maintain alignment and find people who can contribute on one side or the other who might not be aware of new work that's coming into either body. So in specific cases, we make it a little bit more high touch, but that's the general approach that we take to working with other SDOs. And then we send liaison statements just like every other SDO, but we tend to prefer more informal communication and just getting people working together as opposed to these formal liaison statements, unless we really have to.
Just a final comment. That sounds like a great idea. And I think it's going to be, again, in the 5G world, is going to be increasingly important with respect to 3GPP and the whole constellation of bodies that are involved in that effort. So to the extent you can be proactive and informal, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And 3GPP as well is one of those where we have a sort of standing mechanism for coordination and a mailing list where a bunch of interested individuals, not just the liaison manager, are involved. I know that tends to revolve around an in-person lunch meeting, so we might need to change that up a little bit as things go forward. But that's another one that we've tried to be a little bit more hands-on with. Thanks. So I think we have Torles next.
Sorry, so killed by WebEx feature.
If you can just state your full name for the taker.
I was I would like to ask the ISG to come up with some hopefully more liberal guidance for the ability to use the IETF tools when doing virtual site meetings, in the same way that rooms were usable in the physical meetings. I think it would be great if that would apply to the wiki, the Jabber, the Etherpad, maybe the WebEx, right, when we're doing virtual meetings, because right now there is no statements about that, and rather one would fear not to use an Etherpad or a wiki or so to organize such unofficial site meetings, and obviously WebEx and Jabber wouldn't be usable by themselves right now at all.
Thank you for the question. I'm sorry for the delay. Normally I can look people in the eye and see who wants to answer. They raise their hand and we're having to do it via Jabber, so it takes a little bit longer. I think at the moment, and as previewed earlier in the plenary, we have been focusing on in the short order, what can we do to make this particular meeting go off smoothly. We have a lot of decisions that need to be made about how we run things going forward. And so this is, the question about side meetings is something that we will need to tackle. But it's not something that we've really had time to discuss in the context of, many more virtual meetings that are happening. But I think Suresh has more to say about that. So I'll let Suresh follow up.
Yeah, thanks, Torlos. I think when we originally started off with the side meetings, the intent was to clearly delineate the meetings from the official meetings because it was easy for people outside the IETF to confuse them. And that's why we decided, this is not something we wanted to encourage at that time. As like Alyssa said, the times are changing and probably something we need to look at, but that's the original reason why we didn't do specific remote support for this.
Yeah, thanks. Completely understood. And it wasn't a complaint, so I completely understand that this couldn't have been, anywhere on the top of priority up so far. But towards 108, it would be great to give it thoughts. And definitely, I think there should be a clear distinction so people won't confuse.
Thanks. I think we have Stuart next.
I'm not sure whether people in other areas feel the same, but as a long-term control, I get the impression that security reviews are something akin to a Gen Art review by someone who knows a bit about security. They're not, at least in my experience, a review by someone who is a specialist at both security and routing. Now, this leads to a great deal of frustration and a great deal of time spent educating the reviewer on things that we take as read in the routing area. It also, I believe, ultimately leads to a reduction in the quality of the security reviews, because if you know about both subjects, you would be able to drill down on what's really important and not sort of apply a standard rote to what to look for. So can I ask the security ADs to look at either training some of their reviewers in routing, or recruiting some extra reviewers who are skilled in both subjects, or training some routing specialists in sufficient security that they're confident that they would understand the security issues in routing drafts?
Hi, Stuart. So this is Ben Kaduk. Thanks for the question. I actually really appreciate one of your suggestions in there to try and train some people who are existing routing experts in security issues, and would love to talk to any volunteers who want to come forward and get some training in that regard. I think the topic of assigning reviewers to documents to review and what policy to use when doing that has come up actually several times in our security directorate meetings, in the context of, do we want to specifically find people who are domain experts versus doing a more round robin style assignment where you might get someone who has no background knowledge in the area. And pretty universally, the consensus of the directorate has been that the round robin assignment is better, because you can get someone who has a completely fresh perspective. And yes, sometimes it will be difficult for the reviewer, and they might have to put some extra work in to learn the topic, and they might come out a little confused sometimes, but you also do get the really invaluable benefit that sometimes you have someone with a fresh perspective who can find things that are totally not visible to people who already have the domain expertise. And we think that the sort of benefits from having the fresh perspective outweighs the cost of, sometimes not having as good of a review, or having to do a little bit of training for the review. And I guess this is not directly responding to your particular question, but I think it's sort of a related topic that that comes up in many of the routing drafts, which is that, from me as the AD and the directorate, we really want to make sure that the security properties of the protocol as a whole, including, say, whatever extension is in the draft under question, as well as the core protocol, we want to make sure that the security properties are well documented. And that's sort of one of the key things that we're looking for when we do the directorate review. And if there's an existing reference that has the security considerations for the base protocol, that's amazing. We love to see that, whether that's in the specification of the core protocol or a separate document. But unfortunately, for many of the existing and sort of legacy protocols, that the security considerations in the core protocol spec are kind of inadequate, and there hasn't been a follow-up standalone document for the security considerations. And so in many cases, a lot of the fundamental security considerations are just not written down anywhere. And so when we're doing the directorate reviews, we need to have this discussion about, okay, well, what is the best path towards getting these security considerations really documented properly? A lot of the time, that's not going to be document all of the considerations of the base protocol in the document for this specific extension. But I think that's still a discussion worth having. And in the process of having the discussion with the review thread, we can get a better handle and even start to write down what some of those considerations are. And so while I sympathize with your frustration, I do think that we should try and always look for the path towards the best outcome in the future.
Well, I certainly think we need to look for a path to get the best outcome. There's no question about that. I think quite often reviewers fail to understand the sort of
fundamental knowledge that you need just to go to the party in some of the heretic topics, and fail to recognize that actually a lot of these networks are pretty secure because they're some of the hottest areas to attack, and operators have a long history of securing their networks. I also kind of feel that the expectation of the review team is that we write the document for the complete novice instead of assuming that someone needs a certain level of experience to even begin to read the document. And I think that's very reasonable. I think if you're writing a modification or an extension to a complex protocol, you should be assumed that you know all about that protocol before you even start to pick up the new document.
I think that's generally the case, to be able to assume a reasonable level of familiarity with the base specification to work on an extension, but I think it still needs to be documented in terms of some reference or initial statement that, you know, we rely on this base specification. So if you're confused by what you read here, you should go read this other document. Of course, not in those words. And I don't remember specific cases of this off the top of my head to really be able to comment more.
Actually like to, here's Mia Kuhlmann. I would actually like to add a little bit more a general note, because for us, having the directorates and getting these reviews in is very valuable. I think in general, getting more reviews for the documents is a plus. And this is a service to the community. So I'm very thankful for people doing this and volunteering and spending their time on reviewing these documents. It is challenging to review a document from a different area where you're not an expert. It is a lot of time commitment if you actually have to look up background. And it's also hard sometimes to find the right tone. But in general, I think all these reviews and all the comments are meant to actually improve the outcome of the document. And I hope that people can also receive it that way and try to be constructive and try to take into account that somebody reviewing this from a different expertise is trying to bring in its own expertise and cannot be an expert of the protocol that the person is reviewing. But at the end, the goal really is to improve the protocol, to improve the document, and to improve the RFC series.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else in the queue. So this is the last call to get into the queue to ask the ISG. Okay, I should say that we invited questions in advance. We got one from Michael Richardson, which we spoke about at the beginning of the open mic. We got a second question, which was more of an LLC question, so we directed it over to Jay. But in the future, we would be happy to receive questions in advance of the open mic as well. And with that, I think, oh, we have Tony back in queue. Go ahead. Oh, +1 or +Q, Tony?
I thought I would be different. Just to say, it's been a pleasure to be here and involved again. And I was reflecting, I think the last time I was on an open mic to the group was in 1994 as an ISOC executive director, trying to convince the IETF to have a relationship with the Internet Society. So 25 years later, things have changed a little bit.
Great. Thanks for your participation. I think we can move on to the IAB. And I think, Ted, are you going to open up?
Over to Miria from here on out.
I believe we have the recognition first, which you might want to start with.
Well, I'd have to recognize myself, but I think I know myself. I kind of shape myself every day.
We can recognize you at the very end. If you recognize the other people, that would be helpful.
Okay, so these are the outgoing IEB members. You'll notice this is a very large crop. I think this is an entire turnover of an IEB class, which is an unusual thing. I just wanted to reach out to each of you and to say thank you for your service. Christian Wiedema, I think you were with us a fairly short period of time this go round, but have the longest history in the IAB. Eric, I think you're the longest serving of this particular group. Melinda, you are certainly the farthest away, having often come to us from latitudes at least 40 degrees away from us in some cases. Martin, you're the other direction, the farthest away south, the farthest away north. In all things, it was a great subject, and to see you again without your dots, but with passion.
So this is Alyssa Cooper again. Ted, we're not going to just let you recognize yourself. So I just wanted to also say a huge thank you to you. Ted has been the IAB chair for the last 3 years, which is actually a longer tenure than has been standard in recent times. And it's a difficult job. It's unrelenting, and the collection of tasks involved in the IAB is varied and can incur lots of challenging conversations with the community and challenges for the internet itself. And I will just say that personally, I've really valued your leadership and companionship in the journey here. So thank you for all of your efforts. And now it's over to Miria.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Ted, and thank you for all the other IAB members. So at this point, I'm happy that I can take over, and I would like to take like 1 or 2 minutes to just introduce myself and also say thank you for selecting me and trusting in me to serving in this position. That's mainly for the IAB who selected me, but also to the community, because the community in NomCom, they actually gave me the opportunity to go directly from the ISG into the IAB, which is already rare. And then it's even more rare to start as the IAB chair in this position. The reason why I can do this is because I was already the liaison from the ISG to the IAB, so I at least know what's going on, and I'm confident I can serve in this position. However, I'm also aware that it's not easy to transition from one position into the other directly. So I'm very open for, and I will try to be careful about being clear in what role I'm talking. I would be grateful for any kind of feedback or comments people have to me in general. So with that in mind, I basically would like to open the open mic, and I think we have another slide where we show the whole set of IAB members, right? So as I said, I think I'm very open for any kind of feedback. I think for us as a community, as a consensus-driven community, it's very important that people speak up and say their opinion. I know that not all the topics are always interested for everybody, but especially when it's process topics or these kind of things. But you know, if you're actively working in the IETF, you should care about it. You should have an opinion, and so I'd be very happy to take some questions. We have on the open mic now the whole incoming and outgoing IAB, and we also have John Levine here as the temporary RFC series manager. So if you have questions for him, and that opens the open mic. And we have Tony again.
Thank you. My regards to Christian. I pass his old home in Sophia Antipolis every other month, going to ETSI meetings, which gets to my question. ETSI has instituted a change that to attract diversity and more people by creating these informal groups where it doesn't actually require memberships. In some ways, it's a little bit like the IETF. So I was wondering whether there was some way through the IAB, perhaps, or another appropriate mechanism to get more collaboration between with the new ISGs that are being created, for which I think there would be a common interest and in utility.
So thank you. I have to say I'm personally not aware about these Etsy groups, but we do have a liaison with Etsy, so I think that's something we could look at. And we also have a liaison manager for Etsy, so maybe that person, if it's knowledgeable about it, can speak up. Or actually, I just figured we might not have a liaison with Etsy. So maybe that's the first step to consider here, actually.
Yeah, there's an agreement basically for kind of communication and sharing, but it could be improved, and particularly with this kind of sea change of creating these ISGs and trying to broaden the participation and diversity. It's something that brings us into kind of more of a common interest. And at my end, since I'm also the liaison to some other groups, I'll see what I can do to facilitate that.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the next one in the queue is Dominique.
Hi, Dominique Lazansky. I have a couple of Model T program, which I'm a part of, which we're excited about. But it's an IAB program that was recently set up, and I was just curious about what the process is for getting that program up, and with that, and if you need to be on the IAB to get an IAB program running. And that's all. I just wanted to ask to see how that whole process works. Thanks.
I can already answer part of your question, and there will be other IAB members who are more in touch with the Model T program who can give you more information. But one part is that this program, it has an open membership. Everybody can contribute and everybody can engage in the discussion. It's different than what we usually have as programs, but there is also a discussion ongoing in the IAB about how we want to organize programs in future. For this program, it's open. I'm not sure if Stephen or Yari want to add some more here.
Hi, Stephen here. I'm afraid, Dominic, I missed a part of the question because of some audio drops. But the program is open, and maybe if you could repeat the question, I might be able to actually give you an answer.
Actually, I'm asking about like future IAB programs, like if, let's say, I wanted to set one up and I'm not on the IAB, how I would go about doing that, or if that's even a possibility in terms of how it's set up, if that makes sense. I'm not talking about Model T in particular, because I'm excited about that and it's moving forward, but just in general about the process. Thanks.
Okay, I got the question. Sounds like I'm off the hook, which is good. I guess the IAB kind of, from my point of view, if somebody has an interesting thing that they want to talk about, I'll happily talk to them. And if I think it was something worth bringing up with the IAB, I would do that. And then the IAB would decide to pursue it or not. So I guess it's that sort of semi-formal thing that's pretty normal. Maybe other people want to answer, but that's how I would view it.
I mean, as I said already, the idea about the IAB programs was a tool to help the IAB to do technical work and have discussion with not only IAB members, but also experts from outside the IAB. So that's the whole idea about it. But as I said already, we're also discussing internally how we want to organize programs in future. And probably there will be a change in the next coming months and years.
Yeah, this is Yari. I just wanted to add that there's difference between different programs, of course, that some, like if you're managing a relationship somewhere, maybe a little bit more close nature, but when it's a sort of a broader issue in the internet, like the Model T is one example of that. And Steve and I at least felt that it's really important to have open participation and sort of community engagement. And it can, of course, go in multiple different directions, that somebody can get excited in the community that, hey, we have this issue, why don't we do something IAB? And then hopefully the IAB will also go along with that, depending on their opinions.
Your question, Dominic?
Yeah, thanks. And I might follow up offline anyway, because it's so late where I am. So thanks again.
Sure, thank you. So next one in the queue is Larry. I don't have a last name, so maybe you state your name.
Hi, this is Larry Messenger. I wanted to take the opportunity to advertise the W3C community group that I would like more IETF participation in, for helping people suddenly going online, where to find resources. It wasn't, and how to technically, especially technical advice of what kind of bandwidth you need and those kinds of things to coordinate best practices. Anyway, I put the URL for the group in the Jabber room. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And then we have Simon Hicks.
Hi, I'm Simon Hicks. I just wanted to note, as the past chairman of ETSI, about the comment on Jabber that we're not a regional organisation. We have members from 80 countries of the world, a lot of which are outside Europe. Yes, we have Europe in the title. That doesn't make us a regional organisation. We operate from globally. Thank you.
Thank you for this note. So that's the current end of our queue. I will wait a few more seconds. And with this, I will hand back to Alyssa.
Thanks. That takes us to the end of the plenary. So thanks to everyone for joining, and we'll see you online for the rest of the sessions this week. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.